Florida. So I want to thank you again for taking time out of your busy schedule and being here with us today. Senator?
You don't mind, I'm going to speak seated. I had some knee surgery, and if you notice a little bit of a limp, I had no idea that knee surgery had the long-term effects that it does. So I'm going to stay seated. If we're going to talk about an ocean or an urban ocean and today's problems, what I'd like to do is to give you two glimpses. A glimpse from the window of a spacecraft and the glimpse from what's happening in my state right now as a result of sea level rise. When you look back at the planet, it is this incredibly beautiful, but it looks very fragile. It is this colorful creation suspended in the middle of nothing. And space is nothing. Space is an airless vacuum that goes on and on for billions of light years. And there is our home. Now, of course, that had many consequences on me. First of all, what I saw, and I saw how we were messing it up. Give you an example coming across South America. You could see even from that altitude as you orbited the Earth at 17,500 miles an hour, you could see the color contrast in the Amazon where they're cutting the rainforest. And then you could look in the same window just to the east, and you could see the additional silt that discolored the waters of the Atlantic for hundreds of miles from the mouth of the Amazon. Or on the other side of the planet, coming across Madagascar, you could see all of Madagascar in its entirety, and this is 28 years ago. Madagascar had cut a lot of its trees for fuel, and as a result, just like in Haiti, when the rains come, there's no vegetation to hold the topsoil. The topsoil runs down, runs into the rivers. And again, the discolored blue waters of the Indian Ocean at all of the mouths of the rivers on Madagascar. And you could see how we are messing it up there. Or you could see from the standpoint of looking at the rim of the Earth, where the atmosphere stops and you go into the deep black of space, you could see there is a blue band. That is a transition. And underneath that blue band, you could see that thin film called the atmosphere that sustains all of our life. One of the consequences to me in observing how fragile our planet looks from that perspective was that I wanted to become a better steward of what we have. And at the same time, I saw this incredibly alive planet. But we've got to be careful. Just different features unrelated to the topic that we're going to get into, but these beautiful contrasts. For example, the Horn of Africa, where the reddish-brown sands of Somalia contrast with the brilliant blue of the Indian Ocean. Or coming across the oceans, looking back north across India, And you could see the Himalayas as they rose on the horizon, and they looked like they went straight to the heavens. On the day side of the Earth, which is about, of your 90-minute revolution, about 60 minutes, it's hard to see man-made things unless, for example, somewhere in South America, I saw a straight line. It was a road. But on the night side of the Earth, you could clearly see human population. And, for example, you could clearly see the outlines of the state of Florida because most of the population in Florida is along the coast. And that was brilliantly lit up if there was not a cloud cover. By the way, do you know what the brightest city in the United States is on the night side of the Earth? It's Las Vegas, because of the high intensity lights and at the same time usually not a cloud cover. Well, because most of that population in Florida is along the coast, and some 75% of Florida's almost 20 million people. And by the way, we have just surpassed New York. We're the third largest state. They live right along the coast. And so if the IPCC projects that the globe is going to warm between 1.5 and 4.5 degrees Celsius by the end of this century, then that same organization says that we're going to have a rise of the sea level from 1 to 3 feet. And that 75% of the population of the state of Florida is going to be underwater. Right now, low-lying level areas such as Bangladesh are already threatened, but you know the place in the continental U.S. that's threatened the most? It's Miami. And so what happens in Florida is it becomes ground zero, and if you looked at a map of what it would look like in the year 2100, the coastal areas and many parts of the Florida Everglades are all underwater. 14 million out of 19 million people, 14 million on the coast. Over the course of the next several decades, that's going to rise to 28 million. 28 million are going to be underwater. And of course, that's everything. That's homes, schools, that's roads, bridges, power plants. Now, this is not just hypothetical unless you believe Jim Inhofe. Florida Atlantic University, one of our state universities that's a part of our consortium in Florida called the Florida Institute of Oceanography, they've done a study that indicates that Florida has recorded 5 to 8 inches of sea level rise in the past half century. And so that's 8 times the rise over the last 2,500 years. And now during high tide, you can see the flooded roads and the flooded storm sewers. And the National Research Council is saying that we could have 3 feet by the end of the century. So if this is happening, look what it would do to the economy of a particular We have an economy that one of our main engines is tourism. A lot of businesses are there in Florida, and employment as a result of tourism. They directly employ 250,000 people. By the way, I bet you think that California has the longest coastline in the continental U.S. No. California has something like 800 miles. Florida has 1,350 miles of coastline, only to be exceeded by Alaska. But Alaska doesn't have beaches. And the visitors come from all over the world to visit the beaches. And they fish for red snapper up in the Panhandle, and they go for scallops off of Cedar Key, and they go for spring training in many Florida cities, and they watch the sunsets in the Florida Keys, listening to Jimmy Buffett sing Margaritaville. Well, all of these things are going to be at risk, because how do you plan a beach vacation if you don't have a beach? How do you cross a causeway to a barrier island if the roadbed has been degraded because of the constant wave action? And so you can see the economic devastation, not even to mention everything else that is being devastated. Now, before I came to the Senate, I had the hardest job I've ever had in public service. I was the elected insurance commissioner of Florida. And I started sounding the fire alarm bell on this, trying to get insurance companies to pay attention to what's happening, because they insure all of these structures up and down the coast that's going to get flooded. And I could not get them to pay any attention. And a lot of insurance companies today are still not paying any attention. Now, local leaders are starting to have to pay attention, because you take a city like Miami Beach, at high tide, they're already experiencing flooding, drainage problems. They are spending now $200 million in that one little city, pump stations, raised seawalls, stormwater storage. And guess who they're talking to? They're getting advice from Holland, the Netherlands, so that they can learn about large-scale dikes and engineering fixes, what the Dutch have done for centuries. And so Miami Beach is having to take this initiative so that the homes and the businesses are going to continue to stay there for at least for the foreseeable future. But interestingly, it's not just threatening infrastructure. What's happening is it's affecting the water supply as well. Florida is a limestone honeycomb that's like a sponge. And that sponge of limestone that supports the state is filled with fresh water. So as the sea level rise occurs with salt water, it starts to intrude into the sponge. And the salt water is displacing the fresh water. And you get the brackish water, and as a result, it becomes too salty to drink. Now that's happening, for example, in another little coastal town called Hallandale Beach, just north of Miami. And there the local officials are spending $16 million to upgrade their stormwater system and are moving the city's drinking water system to the west side of the city. So you see what's coming. local leaders are the ones right now that are having to take the initiative because they don't have any choice, while others are keeping their heads in the sand. So to try to, and by the way, I'm very proud of our colleagues in the Democratic caucus in the Senate for doing the all-nighter. But that was their night before last, and it's gone today. But I'm taking the Commerce Committee, and we're going to have a hearing in Miami Beach on April the 22nd, and we're going to talk about this. And we're going to bring in all the experts, and we're going to bring in the mayor, and we're going to hear what local governments and businesses and the one group of insurance companies that are now getting interested, and that's reinsurance companies, the ones that reinsure against catastrophe, what they all are doing against this sea level rise. All right, here's another byproduct. And this directly affects the topic of this conference. And oh, by the way, let's go back to our space example. Here's the planet, and the sun's rays come in and they reflect off the surface of the earth, and then they radiate back out in space. But when you start putting greenhouse gases like CO2 that rise in the atmosphere, then in the upper atmosphere they start to serve as a ceiling, a glass ceiling, that when the sun's rays penetrate and bounce off the Earth's surface, they cannot radiate out into space. And thus you get the greenhouse effect. Now, another byproduct of CO2 is what it does to the ocean. Because more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, the oceans become more acidic. And ocean acidification threatens the coral reefs and all the creatures, such as lobsters to clams that make carbonate shells from seawater, and the coral reef system in our state, and just think of the coral reefs in other parts of the world, not the least of which is Hawaii. But in our state, just the coral reefs are responsible for $3.4 billion annually in the economy. And the natural reefs off of South Florida support 36,000 jobs. And they serve against storm surge. Well, the more acidic water threatens the oysters, the crabs, and the lobsters, the things that we enjoy eating. And according to marine biologists at NOAA, when shelled organisms are at risk, the entire food web is going to be at risk, because reefs provide the core reproductive and feeding habit for marine life. Florida has an extraordinary oyster and shellfish industry. The famous Joe's stone crabs in Miami Beach, and they're already suffering because of water quality as well as water quantity issues. And this has happened out in California as well, who the folks are familiar with acidification affecting their $100 million oyster industry on the coast. And so what is it going to take for us to make our oceans healthier and more resilient? Well, how about global warming? What's clear is that the sea level is already affecting our coastal communities. They're trying to adapt. The federal government ought to do its part, but have you tried to pass anything around here recently? It was great that the president put $1 billion resiliency fund to help communities prepare for the impact of climate change. And that's part of his $56 billion infrastructure plan. But do you think we're going to get the votes to pass that if you have to have taxes to fund it? And thus you see part of the problem that we are facing here. The local governments are having to step up, and they're having to finance projects. But where is the federal government? Now, this is something that you can do something about. You all are welcome to come see me, but you don't need to see me. You need to spend your time getting in front of those people who are deniers of, in fact, what is happening, and or who are just so anti-tax they don't want any revenue, and therefore we couldn't fund that $56 billion fund on an infrastructure plan. And don't talk to their staff. It'll go right over their head. You need to get in the face of the member of Congress. Now, they may not listen to you, but if you don't get in their face, how are they even going to know that there's another body of opinion out here? So I wanted to come and give you a rather sober message of what's happening. And it's happening in the continental U.S. right now. And we better start shouting it from the rooftops. Thank you all for letting me come.